What's up guys, it's Z here, welcome back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck of the Day. Today we're profiling one of the new decks that we got in Battle of Chaos. So now let's take a look at Dinomorphia. This is one of those decks that piqued my interest because the playstyle is so weird and so fun both at the same time, just because it's a deck that is like living on the edge at the same time as pretty much winning the game, because you're going to win games with this deck with less than 100 life points like 99% of the time. This is so fun because it's something that we've never seen in Yu-Gi-Oh! And to be honest, right now the deck does feel a little bit incomplete just because we know two certain cards that we're going to get in Dimension Force that just push this deck to the absolute highest level possible. Frenzy and Rexterm will just give this deck more win conditions, more ways to play. So cards that you're going to see in the profile right now, I am going to tell you exactly cards that you're not going to use them post Dimension Force, but you have to use them now if you want to win. But if you want to pick up the deck right now and play it as it is right now, I think this is the most optimal build to do so. So now, before we begin with the video, if you enjoy the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and now let's get to the deck profile. So starting off the monsters, for the Dinomorphia monsters we have of course 3 copies of Theresia. She's the main play you want to see turn 1. She sets one of your traps from your deck, and all the monsters that when they're destroyed you can banish a trap from your graveyard to special summon level 4 lower Dinomorphia monster from your graveyard except themselves. So they basically float each other because there's only one more main deck monster you can play, and these two monsters just keep floating themselves, and when they're destroyed you're using the other effect during your opponent's turn, during your own turn you're using the other one. There's a way to recycle these monsters too with one of their trap cards to go into cards like Lagia and Tolka, because of course these are Dinosaur monsters, so you can use these cards to your advantage. And I think the deck plays a little bit like a control deck for now, but the thing is, one of the control decks that even though it starts with the turn 1 set 5 pass, it can be very explosive very quickly, and because it plays like that, it can play a lot of other cards that some other decks can't, which is I'm going to explain some budget alternatives and some expensive cards that I have into the deck that I'll show a little bit later. But for now, for this is pretty standard, you have to play 3 Theresia. We have of course 3 copies of Diplos. This card is the Foolish Burial. If it's summoned, you send Dinomorphia card from your deck to the graveyard, and if you have 2000 or less life points when you do that, you get to inflict 500 damage to your opponent, so it helps you push for game just a tiny little bit more, which this deck especially now lacks a little bit just because you only have one good extra deck monster at the moment to summon with your fusion traps. When we get Rexterm, then this is going to change, because this is not only going to add power to the deck, but it's going to add a whole new win condition, but I'll talk about that later. So yeah, this card helps you go into the traps that you need into the graveyard, because Kentergina can copy any trap card from the graveyard so you can use their effects. It also sends Theresia to the graveyard or bring her back with alert or float when Diplos is destroyed. And there's a cool play you can do with this with another monster I'm playing, which can basically give you a really good play going second, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Next we have 1 copy of Miscellaneousaurus. This is Dino deck, so you have to play this card just to protect your monster from hand traps. When you have already Theresia in your hand, if you have a Fossil Dig, you can search your Misk, and then if your opponent tries to fail Theresia because they cannot ask her because she sets the trap from the deck, she doesn't search it, you can just use Misk to protect her. You can also use this card to protect your plays when you're trying to going second for try to push for damage. The effect of the graveyard, you will be able to use it eventually during the very grind game, but while testing, it hardly ever came up. Yes, you can use it to go for a level 4 from your deck, but the thing about this deck is that it fuses from the deck so fast that you run out of monsters more quickly than you will be able to use this card's effect from the graveyard. So this is why in theory you can do it, but in practice it's not very optimal. But still, you don't really need it for this, you need it just for the protection effect because it's just so powerful. And the last monster we play is 3 copies of Ultimate Conductor Tyranno. Of course, you have to abuse the most powerful dinosaur monster in existence in a dinosaur diet, because this you will be able to use it very quickly. Now the play I was talking about when going second is that when you use Diplos, you can just send one of your Theresias to the graveyard, and because Diplos has 1000 attack points, you can go into Almirage, and then you already have 2 dinosaur monsters in the graveyard to banish for Ultimate Conduct Tyranno, so you can basically use this as a backup play when you're trying to going second, because the deck doesn't do much going first or going second. You have to set up, and then you have to activate your trap cards, copy them a couple times, and that's when this deck actually starts becoming explosive. But during the early game, you're not going to be able to do much unless you have this play I talked about, which is something that can come up, and this is why this card is an absolute beast. This card just wins games on its own. For the spell cards, we have 3 copies of Pot of Prosperity. Now, this is an expensive card, and the thing is, you can basically replace this with Pot of Duality, and it would not change much. The only play it would change is the one I mentioned right before, that you can use Diplos to send another monster to summon Tyranno going second. Going first, you don't really want to summon Tyranno because it's not like you will have another monster in your hand pop. You will have to pop Tyranno itself for the disruption, which can be good sometimes, but I think it just doesn't add up because you do play a lot of trap cards to disrupt your opponent. It's not like this Book of Eclipse effect is going to add a lot more to the table. So if you don't have Prosperity and you want to play a budget alternative, Pot of Duality is is very decent. You can also play copies of Lilith in your deck if you want to cut on the Tyranno to make Pot of Duality even more viable, because you'll be able to see your traps more consistently this way. But I think this is something that you're going to have to need to do eventually once the new support comes out. Right now, it's not super important to get to the trap cards because you can have other ways to stall because you play other traps that I would not be running eventually. But for now, I think Prosperity works perfectly. Duality does pretty much the same thing, not as well, but you can basically replace this and you will not see that big of a difference in your games. We have, of course, 3 copies of Fossil Dig. You have to search your dinos, nothing to explain with this card. 1 copy of Call by the Grave. Call by the Grave is more important for this deck, mainly because of the fusion traps can be asked. We only have 1 fusion trap at the moment, but since both fusion traps are fusion from the deck and the extra deck, you can basically get asked there and your play will get stopped, so you need to be able to stop that. For now, we only have Domain, but once we get Frenzy, then this is going to become even more valuable because you want these cards to resolve. If they don't resolve, that means you don't get your boss monsters on the field, which means you don't get to play. Now for the trap cards, which is the main part of the deck, so all the Dinomorphia trap cards pay half your life points in order to activate their effects. Now, in the Untrained Eye, in someone new, that would seem like this is a really bad deck, but the thing is, this deck benefits from having low life points, and it also has a lot of ways to protect you from finishing moves when you are so low on life points. So let's take a look at the traps one by one. First of all, we have 3 copies of Dinomorphia Domain. This is the only trap right now you need to max because it's a fusion trap. You fuse from the deck by paying half your life points, and then when your opponent would activate a card effect, you can banish this card from the graveyard and you take no effect damage. And you can use these effects from the graveyard if you have 2,000 or less life points. So as you can see, even if you are like 50 life points, the deck does have ways to protect you from effects like a Hayate attack for game, like any type of burn effect, because without Rexterm, this deck is now very vulnerable to such effects because you don't have a consistent way of stopping your opponent's monster effects from like attacking you directly or dealing you burn damage. You have to rely on these graveyard effects a lot right now. Once Rexterm is out and you can basically shut down your opponent's entire field from using their monster effects, then it won't be that big of a problem, but now you need to rely a lot on these cards. So it's very important to do not banish all of those traps from the graveyard with Kentergina's effect to copy them, because then you're going to lose to a random effect like that. So you need to be able to have at least one of both, one to stop battle damage and one to stop effect damage in your graveyard at pretty much all times, just to make sure that you don't die to a random thing like that. Now this trap fuses the main monster from the deck, which is Kentergina. This card is going to be boss monster of the deck, but we also have more utility traps. The first of the traps are cards you can search whenever you want with Theresia. We also play Trap Trick because most of these are normal traps. Yes, there is one counter trap, but you can use these cards for utility. So the next card is 2 copies of Dinomorphia Brute. This is basically a break sword. You can destroy a Dinomorphia monster you control and one card your opponent controls. It also saves you from card effects that deal burn from the graveyard. Really good card. We have 2 copies of Dinomorphia Sonic. This is a card that negates spells and traps, and you will see it not now, but you will see it eventually once we get the new support, that this deck will be very good at dealing with monster heavy based decks, but when you're playing against backer decks, then this deck is going to struggle a lot. So that's when I think Sonic might be a card that I'm considering bumping up to 3 even now, but I'm definitely going to play 3 copies post Dimension Force just because you need to be able to stop those types of decks too. You do play, of course, 3 copies of Solemn Judgment because this card has perfect synergy with the deck, so you will have 6 copies of cards, 3 of which were searchable, so you can stop spells and traps, which is something the deck desperately needs because it will have a really good way of dealing with monster effects, but not that good of a way with dealing decks like Altergeist, Subterrors, Eldritch. That's the matchups that this deck is going to struggle against the most. We also have 2 copies of Dinomorphia Alert. This is a double monster reborn. You bring back 2 Dinomorphia monsters that their total levels are 8 or less. You can bring back just Kentergina because her level is 6, but most of the time what you want to do with this card is you want to activate it during your opponent's end phase, bring back Diplos and Therizia, and this card, because it locks you into Dinomorphia monsters at turn you activate it, it doesn't help you activating it during your own turn, but if you use it during your opponent's end phase, you can then use them during your own turn to make a Lagia or a Dolka, get a free negate. So yeah, these cards just help you more during your opponent's end phase. Oh, and I forgot to mention that Sonic is a card that protects you from battle damage from the graveyard, so you do have a way of surviving cards that can attack you directly or stuff like that, and of course Alert saves you from effect damage again, so you do have a lot of cards that can help you survive even if you are at like 50 or even less life points. So yeah, this deck does have ways to survive. It's not like it's going to kill itself eventually and lose to random effect. It does have ways to survive such effects, and these traps are the main core of the entire deck. We also have 2 copies of Trap Trick to get access to all the traps. Unfortunately, it cannot get access to Sonic. I'm kind of curious if Sonic would have been a better card if it was a normal trap, because we've been able to access it Trap Trick too, but it's a counter trap, so I can't really complain about that. But yeah, Trap Trick, really amazing card, because right now you are relying a lot on Domain to win. If you don't see Domain, you're going to lose because you're not going to be able to go into your extra deck unless you see Tyranno and your opponent cannot out it for whatever reason. But without Domain, you cannot fuse, and that's why this deck right now feels a little bit incomplete because it only has 3 trap cards that do that. Once we get Frenzy, it's going to become much more consistent and much more powerful as well, but until then, the deck right now has to be played in that manner. So now, the next 6 trap cards I'm going to show you are cards that I don't think you will need post-Dimension Wars. So the first card is 3 copies of Skill Drain. So right now, the deck does not have a way of doing what Skill Drain does because you don't have Rexterm. Once we get Rexterm, you will not need a card like Skill Drain. You are going to have this type of effect in your own archetype. So right now, this card helps because Kentargina is going to get back all of her attack points. She's going to be 4,000 because she loses attack points equal to how many life points you have. So the point is that you have as little life points as possible so you can get her more attack points, but with Skill Drain it doesn't matter. Even if you're at full life points somehow, then she'll just have her 4,000 attack, and this is a really good card going second in combination with the next card, which is 3 copies of Torrential Tribute. The problem I'm finding with the deck is that it doesn't have a way to play really well going second, especially now because the plays are so weak in my opinion, unless you have UCT. Again, I'm gonna keep mentioning that because this is a card that you have to play if you want to have more pressure going second, but Torrential Tribute, when combined with cards like Skill Drain or the next card I'm going to show you, can help you basically break boards, which is something that the deck really needs. Even if you're going to destroy your own monster and you're not going to be able to use cards like Brute or Sonic very easily and you have to pop your fusion monster you summon afterwards in order to do that, it doesn't matter. As long as you resolve this card going first or going second, you're in a really good spot to win. Now, the next cards are card and traps, and of course we need to play them. Three copies of Solemn Strike. Now, once you play this deck, you will realize that this card becomes dead very quickly, but it's still worth playing just because it's the best trap card going first and going second as well. Because when you combine this with Torrential Tribute, it's absolutely a blowout. When you activate Torrential, your opponent tries to negate it with anything, then just Solemn Strike, their entire board is gone. So you need to be able to play this card, and even if it's dead very quickly, if it's dead, then that means that you've gone through your strategy because you have paid life points multiple times, so if you are getting your effects off, so you don't really mind if it's dead after that. It's just here to help you make sure that it gets to that point, so this is why this card is really good. And we also have 3 copies of Solemn Judgment. Like I mentioned with Sonic, this deck struggles a lot with backrow decks, so you need cards to negate trap spells and trap cards. So along with Sonic, we're gonna play through Solemn Judgment, and I think Solemn Judgment has found basically the archetype that it was meant to be in because it pays half your life points, so it has direct synergy with Dinomorphia's mechanic. So yeah, you're going to play this card no matter what build you're playing. Now, the cards I'm going to cut when we're playing Post-Dimension Force, mainly we're going to be 3 copies of Skill Drain, 100%, and we'll think about the Torrentials. We'll update the deck, but for now, this is what I'm thinking that will happen once we get the new cards. Now, for the extra deck, we have 3 copies of Kentargina. This is your boss monsters. It requires 2 Dinomorphia monsters with different names, so basically you're going to fuse always a Theresia and a D+ from your deck domain in order to summon her. She loses attack points equal to your life points. She starts with 4,000, and the more you pay life points, the more attack points this card is going to get. And during the main phase, as a quick effect, you can pay half your life points to banish a Dinomorphia normal trap from the graveyard to copy that trap's effect. So you basically can copy the domain you used to summon her to summon another Kentargina from your extra deck. Of course, again, with Rexterm, this card is going to become insane because you will be able to summon her with Frenzy and then copy Frenzy to summon Rexterm, and then you have paid your life points in half twice. Rexterm can then pay half your life points again because it has another effect on the field. So you basically can get, with 1 copy of Frenzy, you will be able to get to 1,000 life points. So this is why I'm saying that this deck right now doesn't have the full power that it needs. Of course, it's going to win because you do play unfair cards like Skill Drain, Ultimate Conductor, and all that stuff. But again, you're going to see a lack of power, especially if you have tested the deck with a new support and you try to play it now in real life. You will see how weaker it is compared to what it could be. We have 3 copies of Stolbergia. This card, you don't summon it too often. It's just here because if you run out of Kentarginas and you still have copies of Domain or monsters in your deck, you want to be able to summon something from your deck at least. In the future, this card is going to become just fusion material from the extra deck for Rexterm, but for now, it's a card that might come up in sometimes. It doesn't have any attack points, which sucks, and the effect is that if you have 2,000 or less life points, you do not pay life points to activate trap cards or Dinomorphia monster effects. Right now, this effect is okay, but once you get to the new cards, you will want to have as little life points as possible just to be able to lock your opponent's plays completely. And of course, when your opponent activates a monster effect, you can inflict damage to your opponent equal to that monster's original attack, so it can kind of help you close out the game, but not really because it has 0 attack points, so you would rather have Kentargina on the field rather than this. So this will only come up if you've run out of Kentarginas throughout the duel. For the Xyz monster, we have, of course, 2 copies of Lagia and 2 copies of Dolka. You play multiple copies of cards in your extra deck because mainly of Prosperity. The thing is that you cannot really run Extravagance, even now, just because Kentargina is so important, so you cannot play without her. But Prosperity doesn't forbid you from banishing anything you want, so you just banish the multiple copies. There's not something too great that you can play, aside from playing multiple copies of these cards in the extra deck. You don't hardly ever summon anything other than Dolka, Lagia, and Kentargina right now. Almiraz might come up in that one scenario I mentioned, but still, these cards are really good because of Alert. You activate Alert during your opponent's end phase, place, and then you basically summon these first thing during your turn, and you get free interruptions. We have one copy of Tornado Dragon. In some matchups it can help because this deck, like I said, has weak matchups against backrow decks, so this might help a little bit. We have one copy of Abyss Dweller because this card is auto-win against a lot of decks, and one copy of Gustav because if you have 2 copies of Ultimate Conductor Tyranno and you still didn't manage to destroy your opponent completely, then maybe this card can seal the deal. And for the Link monsters, we have one copy of Almirage. This card is here for the play with Diplos, sending another monster from the graveyard, linking away Diplos, and you have 2 dinos in the grave in order to summon your UCT. And we have one copy of Dark because in any deck that plays dark monsters, and yes, the Dinomorphia monsters are dark, so you can summon this very easily. If you can summon this card, play it. It's so powerful. As long as DP is in the format, this card is going to be crucial in a lot of games. You need to be able to summon this to steal their DP, and then you will have a free negate, and your opponent is going to have to be summoned to summon one of the bricks from the graveyard during the next turn, so they have to find a way to send it again to the graveyard in order to be able to use Celestial's effect. This card just makes your opponent's plays outward. It stops you from losing to DP during the following turn, on top of giving you DP on your own field. This card is absolutely ridiculous, and of course the effect to float with a monster with 1500 or less defense points comes up in this deck because you need to search your Theresia if you cannot get access to her otherwise. So yep, that's the deck, guys. Dinomorphia is one of the most fun decks that I've seen in quite a while, to be honest. It's just so different compared to anything we've ever played before, so I'm really excited to get even more good cards. And once Dimension Force comes out, we're going to update the deck. We're going to show you how the deck is going to change, and it's going to change a lot, so trust me on that. But for now, it's still a decent deck, so even if you want to play it right now, it's a good deck to play. It's not as powerful as it could be, but still a really good deck nonetheless. So yep, that's the deck, guys. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and we'll see you next time.